pre-show quid pro quo. Amber, you get one question. It can be any question in the world. It can be, what is my favorite kind of tea? It can be, which painter do I really like, or painters? It can be anything. It can be, where's Waldo? Go ahead, you get one question and ask.
All right. What mythical creature do you wish actually existed?
What mythical creature do I think actually existed?
Do you wish actually existed?
Do I wish actually existed? Dragons. Easy. Dragons. Yeah, no. Dragons have to be, they're definitely up there. I think they're just incredible creatures, and there's wonderful stories that come from dragons, and yeah, there's just so much about them that is interesting. They seem to, I mean, it's not a universal. So many different cultures have their take on the dragon, and it's really interesting, and they each kind of add to the mythology of dragons themselves. But imagine seeing dragons in the sky like on a daily basis. That'd be awesome. I just think it would be really, really. I mean, it would be terrifying, but. Yeah, no, I think from every dragon story, from St. George to, I think, St. Theodorus was like the original dragon saint. Yeah, they're all amazing. So my answer, easy, dragons. I want dragons is what I'm trying to say.
Awesome.
Great question, Amber. Thank you so much for asking it. Hey everybody, welcome to What Magic Is This, where the past is merely a present to the future. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and in this podcast we're going to be talking about magic, the occult, the paranormal, the supernatural, the esoteric, and the weird. And if you've never listened to the show before, what happens is that I give my guest a list of about 15 topics. They can choose one of these topics, and then I bring them on the show, and we record. Try to think of it as a bit of a sitting in on a tutor session, because the guest doesn't really do a ton of talking. They will ask questions if they have it, but for the most part, it is the tutors doing more of the talking. And yeah, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because people do ask, like, why do you even have guests? They say 5 things. It's like, well, sometimes they don't feel like talking, but if that's the case, we're going to roll with it anyways. Yeah, that's the show. And my guest today is Amber. Amber, how are you?
I'm well.
Fantastic. Amber is one
Happy to be here.
Amber is one of my oldest, dearest friends. She's one of the most important people in my life, and I'm super happy to have her on the show because we have, I wouldn't say disagreements, but just different worldviews. Just we come at things from a different angle, but we never hate each other for it, and it's always good for a discussion, and I'm really excited to have her on the show. So would you agree, though, there's like our way of looking at things is a bit, it's not diametrically opposed, but it's just like, yeah. They're a bit different.
I'm a skeptic and a scientist. And
yeah. The enemy. No. Everybody, all my biggest heroes, they're all scientists or historians. I really have no issues. But I thank you so much for being on the show, Amber. And
Absolutely.
And it's great to actually finally have you on here. I think you might be number 2 as far as oldest friends that have appeared on the podcast. So, well done. You get the silver.
Hey, that's not half bad.
That's not half bad, exactly. So, you have chosen a very interesting topic for today's episode. You've chosen the 4th dimension. Ooh. So, I just want to get a little disclaimer in there. I am not a mathematician in any way, shape, or form. I did terribly in physics when I was in high school. I'm bad at math. Math to me is almost impenetrable. I have to use a calculator for seemingly 2-digit subtraction. Like, I'm very, very bad at math. So it's not going to be an overly math-heavy episode. I'm sorry. There are books for that. Find them. I will try. For this episode, I thought that I could just go off the top of my head. You said, Doug, I want to talk about the 4th dimension. And I went, great, easy. I'm not going to have to do any kind of work. I can wing it and we're good to go. I thought it was going to be easy. No. It does not look like that. I started researching. I was like, there's things I have to talk about. No, I can't just sit back on this episode. So we're actually going to get into the 4th dimension. I'm going to start with a Baby Doug story, because everybody likes the Baby Doug stories. For a time, from the age of about 7 to about 13 or 14, I was obsessed with time. I still am. And not healthily obsessed with time. I would wonder what happened to the time when I would be asleep. And for a long period of my life, years, absolute years, nearly a decade, I would lay in bed thinking about time and where did it come from and where did it go. I remember specifically not being able to sleep for days or not weeks, because eventually I would just pass out from exhaustion, but I would just sit thinking about where did the time go. And for me, it was somehow entwined with the idea of death, that there is only a certain amount of time that we have, and then when that's done, what happens? So I found ways around it. If you've listened to the Soul Flight Astral Projection episode, I started to use this time where I couldn't sleep in different ways. But for me, time has always been there, and it has been of an extreme interest for me. And I'm still time crazy to this day. So with that little story, let's get into it. What is the fourth dimension? Amber, if I was to ask you what is the fourth dimension, explain it in one word, what would you say?
Space time?
Space-time, close, but the word is in there. Time, exactly. Most people, if you ask them what is the fourth dimension, they're going to say time, which is true in a way. Other people, and you've got the second part right as well, is they say that it's a hyperspace direction that is different than time, which is also true. Other people would say that it's spatial, which is also true. What we need to understand about the fourth dimension is that it is around us always. It is incredibly hard for us to visualize the fourth dimension. It's pretty easy to explain to people what the one dimension is, the second dimension, the third dimension. So 1D is basically a line. You just have a simple line. 2D, you'd have a shape, so it would be like something like a square that's actually got sides on it. 3D is if you actually add depth to that square and you pull it out, and so you're bringing a bit more. And so we're stuck with an object now, something. A cube, 4D would be perpendicular to a cube. It's very tough to think about. So it's like a cube within a cube within. It's crazy to even. It's tough for our minds to think about the fourth dimension. We have Albert Einstein with his ideas of relativity. He says that the fourth dimension was basically a hyperspace where the past and the future are somehow fluid, that photons carry info and causation that have a fixed speed limit, which is the speed of light, and that an event in an observer's past may be in another observer's future. So we're getting really, really complex here for sure.
So I've heard it once described, and I was just wondering if you would agree or disagree or even expand on this, as if you could see yourself in the fourth dimension, you would be like both an infant version of yourself and as an older person of like all at the same time. So
correct, yes.
All versions of yourself throughout time simultaneously somehow.
I will definitely touch on this momentarily. Yes, you jumped the gun. You got it. So what's crazy is that, and this blew my mind when I eventually found out about it, and then it started, and I might get a slap on the wrist with this, but please go with it, is that if beings existed in dimensions, they can only see, in quotation marks, the dimension that precedes it. So if we think of a two-dimensional object, while if we're looking at it from above, a square, from its perspective, it's actually only seeing things in the first dimension. So it's going to just see the line, right? A square could be standing next to another square, and all it would see is, because of its two-dimension, a line. If you think about our perspective, because we're 3D, think about this. As much as we'd like to think that we see things as depth, everything appears to our field of vision as like a painting or like a canvas, right? Now we'd like to say, oh no, we can see the depth, but truthfully we can only see the dimension that precedes us. So 3D, we kind of see things as two dimensions, strangely enough. A 4D being would see all moments of everything and everything in it. The best way of explaining it is, as Amber brought it up, it would be like a caterpillaring through time. You'd have from your birth and your conception, the zygote being formed by different molecules, all the way till you eventually decay, snaking through this space-time, strangely enough. It has been pictured in art. The best picture that I can think of is Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. And if you've ever seen that painting, it is somebody going down the stairs. as the action of them going down the stairs itself, fluidly moving, which is really incredible. And if you've not seen that painting, it is definitely worth taking a look at. If we could take a small time of an instance of something happening, say the rolling of dice, when you roll the dice, it would be every time the dice hits the ground, that would make one solid movement to when it eventually comes to a supposed stop. If we take the block out of that small segment of time, you would see the things that go into creating the die. You would see absolutely everything to eventually when you throw the die away and it travels off to a dump everywhere. It's like you can follow this straight through all of this space-time. When talking about the impermanence of time, Albert Einstein, in a quote that is used quite often, says that time is a stubbornly persistent illusion. When people say this quote, they normally forget the context in which he said it. And he was talking actually about a lifelong close friend of his who had passed away. So just like me when I was younger, he was not only talking about time, but he was talking about death in this instance, which the two go together quite well, I think. Now, many say that the universe itself is four-dimensional. You have Stephen Hawking, and if you've ever seen the movie A Brief History of Time, the idea of a teacup existing as both broken and unbroken. And just that's a really interesting movie to see, to think about this. Einstein's mentor, a gentleman by the name of Hermann Minkowski, he saw the universe as a block universe. So everything is there in one block, and that the bodies we experience as 3D are simply cross-sections of these fourth dimensions. So we're actually worm-like beings snaking through these strange, crazy sections of space-time. All of the molecules that exist before us, they come together for a short period of time, forming a zygote and growing into a child. Eventually your birth, going all the way snaking through this strange, crazy instance of space-time, and you have other people as well going through there. Sometimes they intersect and sometimes they blow apart. It's really quite insane. And then when you pass away, your molecules, and they go out until they come back together again in some different object or form, or perhaps a plant, if you will, or a sheep or a capybara, whatever you like.
That was a very diverse set of examples there.
I saw a video of a capybara a little bit earlier today, so maybe that's just what I'm going off of. So this is incredibly hard for us to wrap our heads around, of course. And if this description of the fourth dimension doesn't suffice, I would say you're right. You're absolutely right. There really is not enough to explain something that we can barely see, or we can't see it, but we could experience it. I'll get into it. But to me, what is the fourth dimension? I say it is a lattice around which everything that has, is, and will happen happens. There you go. That's basically the way that I'll put it. So let's get into a little bit of history of the fourth dimension. Basically, the idea of thinking about higher dimensions really hit its stride in fin-de-siècle, Victorian England. People need to realize that this period of time, from about the 1850s to about 1910, this was the creation of the world we live in. Our wonders and horrors, people were all trying to figure it out. Everything was new. We had electricity starting to become a thing. The light spectrum was finally mapped. Politics kind of had a wrench thrown in with Marxism. Psychology started becoming a thing. Mathematics became huge. And of course, you've got spirits. People start to get big into spiritualism, or the idea of what happens after you pass away. This was all here within the craziness of the Victorian age and Victorian England. But what was really big is that things started to exist like William Whewell's The Astronomy and General Physics Considered with Reference to Natural Theology in 1833. He said that there was one set of natural laws that could govern everything that happened in the universe at all times, past and present. And from there, the Victorians took this and they just said, if we can't explain it, we very well might be able to, or at least we'll come up with a theory for it. The interest in dimensions really kicks off with a book was produced called Flatland by Edwin Abbott. Last name Abbott. The book was written by A Square. So if you think of Abbott, that's two A's, A squared, get it anyways. But the character in the book is actually a square. This is a very cheeky book. It was mainly a satire of social structures within Victorian England. The lower class stayed where they were and the upper class were there. And all of this fun stuff. But it's a really fun book to read. If you haven't read it, I think they've made movies about it. You're nodding.
I definitely, as soon as you said that, I didn't make the connection with this topic, but I'm familiar with it, and I'm really excited to hear you bring it up. Like, yeah, Flatlander.
Yeah, I think everybody should read, like everybody, not even just people interested in the occult or the paranormal. It's a wonderful book, and it is cheeky, but it does go into what happens when some crazy circumstances happens to a square in the second dimension, what happens with a three-dimensional object moving in. And so what does occur is that in the house of a square, a sphere appears. And so from what you know of the second dimension or from Flatland, how does a sphere first appear to the square?
As a dot.
Correct. Yeah. And a dot that slowly eventually gets bigger and bigger and bigger, forming into a circle, and then going back again to a dot, and then just eventually disappearing. And it's almost a take on Plato's cave, like to try and tell the people, like, look, I saw something and it was like a ghost, or people thought he was crazy. Anyways, I won't ruin it for you, but some crazy stuff happens after that. But it is indeed a wonderful thing to read. And if we think about this, like, Amber, how would you say that something like a fork or a hand would first appear if it was to pass into the second dimension?
Going back to what you were saying before about like perspective and only being able to see the previous dimension just made me that really clicked with me, because it's we're not actually seeing in three dimensions, we're interpreting things as if we could see them, like inferring by size how far away something is. So I would think if a hand was to pass through the second dimension, you'd probably just see like four little circles that would eventually be like one big circle as it got to the hand.
Exactly.
And then disappear as you pulled your hand back out.
Bingo. Yeah, crazy, eh? Flatland is a book, even if this is new to you, you need to read it, because it's some wonderful thought experiments. And I will mention a book a bit further up down the line that talks a bit more about Flatland, and it's really quite wonderful. So it's well worth a read. And since then, talking about dimensions has not gone away at all. We have things like string theory now, in which they have no less than 10 dimensions and as many as 26 dimensions. It gets a bit much. Like string theory it had its moment and it's kind of going away. The way that I try to talk about it is that it's a bad chef who thinks that by adding more salt, because salt adds flavor, that adding more salt to something will make it tastier, but salt is actually a flavor in and of itself, so they're over-salting their dish, but that's just my thing with string theory. Yeah, I have read quite a bit about string theory. Anyways, we have to back up a wee bit, and we have to talk about one gentleman by the name of Charles Howard Hinton. Now, he gave life to the fourth dimension. It's from him that we get most of our ideas or our interest from the 4D world. He was born in 1853. He was the son of a surgeon and an author by the name of James Hinton, who is an interesting character. You should definitely look him up. Actually, he's a character in the Alan Moore graphic novel From Hell. He was friends with William Whitley Gull, who became Jack the Ripper. And at one point, he even talks about his son, Howard Hinton, in the book. James was a fan of polygamy. He was an interesting character. He was always big on the ideas of women and the morals of the society in which women exist. He is once quoted as saying, "Christ may be the savior of men, but I am the savior of women, and I don't envy Jesus a bit." So everybody needs a hill to die on. Yeah, he's a crazy guy. Everybody needs a hill to die on. Women and polygamy was James's. Anyways, back to Charles Howard. He went to Oxford. He got a degree, and he became a teacher at Uppingham College in, I believe, Rutland in England. He got married. He had 4 children. Actually, one of his children invented the jungle gym, which is kind of crazy. And then on the sly, he married a second woman. because he is his father's son. And yeah, he lost his job because of this. Eventually, he wrote for a little bit, but eventually he moved to the United States and taught at Princeton University. It was there that he invented, this is kind of where most people not know of him, but he made a name for himself because he invented a machine that would pitch baseballs at people by using gunpowder. So he literally invented that thing that people use for batting practice, but he used gunpowder instead. But yeah, he died after giving a toast at a function, and his toast was to all the female philosophers of history. So women were very much on his mind. But to get back to the fourth dimension, in 1880 he wrote so this would be 4 years before Edwin Abbott. He wrote a small essay called What is the Fourth Dimension? And he chewed on it for the next 24 years, and he wrote a book in April of 1904 called The Fourth Dimension. And just a little occult curiosity there, April 1904 is also when Aleister Crowley transcribed the Book of the Law. It's where he said that his guardian angel was talking to him and it would birth the new aeon. So some things were happening in April of 1904. Anyways, in this book, Hinton says that it's not time. The fourth dimension is not time, but a spatial dimension itself. And from that, it became a whole new ballgame. So he would do some very interesting things. He actually toyed around quite a bit. He devised cubes, like actual hold-in-your-hand cubes, with different colored sides on them, and he would try to work out the time-space continuum with these cubes. And I will put up in the show notes to the episode some examples of what colors the cubes were and how... I don't know if we have... Oh, no, we do have how he would try to imagine the fourth dimension, but it's really quite interesting. He himself said that he did experience the fourth dimension every once in a while, like momentarily for a few seconds before eventually slamming back into the three-dimensional world. Dimensions, specifically the fourth dimension, was serious business to Hinton. And he said that he was very crazy about the brain. Again, the brain was really big in Victorian England as well. And he said that the mind was somehow hyper-thick. The mind was able to do very special things, and that the molecules that make up the brain are incredibly important. Hinton is also the one that came up with what is called the Tesseract. Are you familiar with the Tesseract at all, Amber?
Yeah, I was hoping that you would bring up the Tesseract.
Do you want to try and explain? How do you understand the Tesseract?
Oh gosh, I can't try to explain it. I just remember that one of my favorite books as a kid, they had the Tesseract, and then
A Wrinkle in Time?
then they made the movie, and I was like, there's a lot of political ideas in here that I did not see when I was 12 and read that. Anyway, but that's actually one of the things that and Interstellar actually did a really decent job of describing it.
Actually, I think they did do a very good job. And that movie doesn't get as much... it's a good movie. It's actually a very good movie. And I think it will be with us.
Actually, pretty well researched, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. But the Tesseract itself, as an experiment, I would just say, if you want to think about how our brain is able to maybe comprehend higher dimensions, get yourself a piece of paper, draw an octagon on that piece of paper, obviously, and for every one of the outer sides, make the parallel line cube for each one of the outer sides of the octagon. And it's actually... as you're doing it, you're starting to see something take shape. And what you are drawing on a two-dimensional piece of paper is a way to try and understand the fourth dimension. And if you ever see, you can look up YouTube videos of Tesseracts. It's a cube within a cube, and as one cube moves through the other one, anyway, it's just really quite incredible. But to Hinton, he said that the brain can partake of hyperdimensionality because it can conceive it. So, to Hinton, he basically said that our brains, the molecules and the things that make our brains, the gray matter itself, is a tesseract. So, very
That's a really Descartes sort of way of thinking about the fourth dimension.
Yeah.
So the brain can conceive it, and so therefore...
Very much so. And Cartesian, the dualism that comes from René Descartes, it really, it was popular, but it really, really hit its stride in Victorian England. That was where they basically said,
makes sense.
Mind is one thing, matter is another thing, and then also let's go take over other parts of the world and subject them to, because they're...
for sure. Yeah. And colonialism. It all just goes together.
Anyways. Yeah, it really, really does. I could talk about such things for hours. So, to Hinton, if it is a space, seemingly, what is this space? So, I touched on it a little bit in the Alan Moore episode, and in fact, your name, Amber, actually is kind of a bit of a clue. Imagine every moment is a mosquito trapped in amber in some small way. And I know that sounds like really constricting, and it is, but I explained it in the Alan Moore episode is our lives are basically like film reels, and that each frame on that film reel is a moment in time. And you could go 20 years in the future or 20 years into the past, but that frame is not going to change. It is there permanently. But the only thing that seems to give it movement is the projector. And what would be the projector be in this case? That would be us. That would be our consciousness that runs through these moments. Now, a lot of people find this hard to sit with, but hang in there. Yeah, moving through time is difficult as everything is already there in a four-dimensional block. And this is what is referred to as the Minkowski block universe. Again, this was Einstein's mentor. And what we can perceive as any given moment at the present state of affairs is a narrow slice of cross-section of that block. So again, this is tough because this is basically saying that there is no such thing as free will. And we live in a society where we're all about how we do things and that it's my decision and it's my choice. This is really tough to sit with. But there have been experiments, and it has been brought up, and this is the experiment. And maybe, Amber, I don't know if you've heard about it. I'm hoping you have. Do you know who Benjamin Libet is?
I'm not sure.
At the University of South California in the 1980s, he did an experiment. It was very simple. He hooked people's brains up to encephalocardiographs. Am I saying that right? Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. And he asked them to do something very simple. He asked them to push a button, and he would monitor the brain. And they did. So he wanted to see what happened for something very, very simple. And the data was incredibly interesting. And when I heard about this, it blew my mind. I think I read about it first in Ian McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary. But the action of pushing the button came before the brain registered that it was going to push the button itself. And it was milliseconds beforehand. So what came first, the action of pushing or the brain itself? People said, oh, the equipment that was used wasn't very good. They've done recent tests, and it still seems to be the same thing, which is strange.
That is fantastic. I have heard of that experiment. The name didn't ring a bell, but I lose track of names. And I don't want to go off track, but it just makes me think of, if we're looking at everything being predetermined, but if then you throw the idea of the multiverse in there, then it's then it's okay. So we have all of our time stream may be a specific projector going across that reel, but there's infinite number of additional streams.
But it's true. No, it really is true. Imagine. So these experiments, they dropped a time bomb into the idea of free will. It got to the point where people were just like, well, then, there is no such thing as consciousness. And it just got like, wow. People really freaked out about this idea. So some might say, and it might be my contention as well, that we are actually beings of the future. And where does the future exist? Well, it's all around us all the time. Remember, we're sneaking through it at every moment. What of us? What of our tesseract brains? How do we get a glimpse of the fourth dimension or time-space? And, well, we can. And we do. And you have. We're going to talk about time loops and retrocausation. If you've listened to the show before, I talk about this book quite often, and I do have to talk about it again. It was released in 2018 by Dr. Eric Wargo. He's an anthropologist, but he says that a lot of things, basically all existence, is a time loop where we are seeing the future in certain things and we are acting on it, and then that action itself causes something to change in the future, which comes back to changes in the present and in the past. It is incredible. And things like clairvoyance, that is actually a misrecognized time loops, and they're happening all the time. And when I say that we experience them, the best way of looking at this is dreams, which are glimpses of future structures built by past bricks. And what I mean about that is that the memories and the experiences that we have that make up our dream world are the only way that we can interpret things that haven't happened to us. So when we see the future, it comes at us through the things that we already have from the past, which allows us to look at things, and that is only how we're able to see them, is when they happen in the future. It finally gives meaning, and it gives a perspective as to what happens. There is a circumstance that is brought up quite a bit by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, in which a woman, her son wanted to go to the zoo, and she had a helper around the house, or a nanny, and the nanny took her child in a car to go to the zoo. And later on, she had this feeling, this crazy, crazy feeling, and she saw a car filled with white smoke and her child screaming. She calls her nanny on the cell phone, gets her nanny to drive home immediately. Like, you need to come home right now. She does, and the woman tells her, like, take the back roads, please stay away from any major areas of traffic, and the nanny complies, and eventually the child gets home. It's all good. The next day, and due to the persistence of a child, the child asks the mother, the nanny has the day off obviously, if they can go to the zoo. Everything seems fine. The mother takes the child in a car, and as she's going through an intersection, she gets completely T-boned. The airbag produces this white smoke that entirely filled her car, and her child is going absolutely crazy. Now, she was seeing something that caused her to change what would happen in the immediate future, which probably had a ramification for causing what later occurred the next day, which is a giant crazy loop. And the thing that we have to realize is that when these people are saying that they saw the future, they're not seeing the instance of what happened to them. What they are actually seeing is their reaction to finding out when the things finally click into place and are given meaning. You are sensing your future state. You are not seeing the future, you are sensing your future self through either trauma or reward. And by reward, I mean something that Eric Wargo, and it comes from Jacques Lacan, he calls it jouissance, which is, the simple way of explaining it is like, it's a pleasure from pain. A lot of people said that they had a premonition of major world events like the tsunami or 9/11. And when I say reward, people say, like, well, what's rewarding about that? They're not sensing the destruction and the trauma of the event, but they are sensing their fascination with a major world event. They're maybe sensing the surviving of that event, especially if they live in New York City, which was where a ton of these premonitions came from. They're sensing some kind of reward, something that makes them feel. And it is this jouissance that is almost an amplifier that allows this loop to occur. Anyways, incredible stuff. But with the glass block model, of course, this seems to make sense. If all time is there, we can experience parts further up in the timeline, even though we see it as being linear. The future is never seemingly far away. We actually live in the near future entirely. And this has ramifications that goes through things like evolutionary functions. It can explain things like why you get that odd feeling when somebody's walking behind you, only to find out later that they have a knife. It gets really, really heady. And with things like meaning, again, meaning allows us to recognize these. Meaning arrives from the future, and it guides the present and past events that will find their ends in future interpretations of meaning. I know that sounds like a lot. The brain also seems to recognize its own future. The neurons that fire together, wire together kind of thing. Yeah. But you're not seeing the event. Again, you're seeing your reaction to these events. So something to sit with for sure. So there are many cases of this.
Neurons that fire together, wire together. I know that was neurology that was hammered in pretty heavy. Mm-hmm. But that would imply that you're noticing or reacting in this loop that you're suggesting is not just a minor or a singular event. It would have to be something that would be occurring, hundreds of times
a day.
So it's
It's constantly
so
going.
that's it. Yeah. Okay.
It's constantly happening. Yes, absolutely. So, um, there's many cases of this, and especially you can get them in dreams. I can talk of even the last 3 months. I write down my dreams constantly when I have them, although strangely enough, I'm not having a lot of dreams right now. Anyways, there was an instance recently is December where, for some strange reason, I decided that I needed to look up some author. He was a spiritual figure who I hadn't thought of in more than like 15 years. I was like, I really need to look him up right now. I don't know what's really making me do that. And then the next day he died. It recently happened with the death of Max von Sydow. I was lying in bed, and when I lie in bed, I'll talk about what this actually is in a bit. But I just kind of opened my mind and just let all these images of things kind of go through my mind. I'm kind of half asleep still, and it did. And for some strange reason, I was thinking about Max von Sydow, the actor who was in The Exorcist and Minority Report and The Seventh Seal, only to walk over to my phone, which I keep outside of the bedroom, and turn it on and look at the news of the day, and Max von Sydow had passed away that day. It happened as recently as last week where I was doing some active imagination exercises, and there was a symbol that came very, very clear to me. And then literally later that day, I received a book in the mail and opened it up to see that very same symbol in that book. I'm not seeing these things. I'm seeing my reaction and my reward to being somehow right, maybe.
So are you tracking false positives? Like, is
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
like, so what is that then? Is that a
Somebody who,
suggestion that there is some sort of determination or
yeah, well,
alternate?
there's a way of thinking about it specifically, and I don't know if this answers your question, but people that are really good at this kind of stuff, one of the things that scientists say is that, well, their hits are quite low. I mean, they're at like 30.
That's where my brain immediately went.
Yeah, they're hitting at about 30%, right? Like even the really good ones, guys like Ingo Swann, 30%. That's not. But here's a better way to think about it, and I don't know if this makes sense or if I'm putting up some kind of a straw man. If you play your entire career and you're playing baseball and you hit 3 out of every 10 times you go to bat, you're in the Hall of Fame. Baseball is hard to do, as is something like telepathy or clairvoyance or hitting something. So these things, they are definitely lower than chance. But if you keep doing it, strangely enough, you get better at it. And I'd say that I'm nowhere as close to getting, as far as like specific things in dreams, like, oh, there was a red hat, somebody wearing a red hat in the dream. I don't log those like that. That doesn't stay there. But there are instances where it's like, that is actually what I dreamt. That is, I had a crazy situation and it was there maybe once every 2 weeks kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And that's probabilities too, right? Like if you're
Correct.
looking at guessing 1 out of 4 cards
Mm-hmm.
that's being shown to you versus thinking of a symbol
Right.
that you haven't seen before or at least wouldn't recognize as having seen prior, and then that coming up, like what is the probability of that instance versus obviously the other is 1 in 4,
Yes.
but the probability of seeing a random symbol, so yeah, anyway.
No, it is, and what's crazy about this kind of stuff, and specifically when we talk about statistics, is that they can work for materialist, rationalist science as much as they can work for actually using statistics of paranormal and strange occult activity. Like, strangely enough,
Yeah.
it goes both ways. I mean, I think what we really have right now is just a dysfunction of how we see the methodology of science, specifically with things that seemingly are irrational. Then again, the end point of rationality is to explain how the limits of rationality actually are. So that's Blaise Pascal.
The thing is that
Yeah.
all of these topics are not mutually exclusive, right? Like
No.
it's very hard to stay, especially with somebody talking to somebody with a mind like yours. I think you and we tend to veer off into
We do.
101 different pocket
Absolutely.
concepts. But yeah, I will try to
No.
stay.
Oh no, we could. Amber and I could, and we have talked for absolute hours about this kind of stuff. We really, really have, and it's never a fight. And I never feel like frustrated. It's just like we're dealing with the craziest of the crazy a lot of the time, which is why our conversations are so wonderful. The statistic stuff, it's tough because there are statistically there are studies that have done that has shown that, oh yes, this actually has more of a validity than the idea that aspirin will help your heart. I would say that dreams are a very important thing for people to look into, specifically your dreams, because again, if Wargo was right, that what you were seeing are segments of your future built from your past experiences or your art of memory or your memory theater, and you can do this, and it is shattering, like specifically, and it's not. I don't believe it's selective attention. Like I really don't. Sometimes something incredibly strange will happen in your dream, and then it happens in real life. I'm thinking of one instance where I was walking out of a convenience store in my dream, and some woman put a jug of milk that she purchased in the convenience store down to get into her car, and some kid came and kicked the jug of milk like a soccer ball, and it went over absolutely everything in this woman, and that was even incredibly strange. It happened 8 hours later. Exactly. I have the note. I can show it to people. I can put it up. It's like, I don't know what's going on here. So, incredibly strange. And the idea also is that, and this is something that Jeffrey Kripal wrote about time loops, it says that we are always, each of us, unconsciously sending our psychic tentacles into the near future to scope out the environment and help us negotiate what is about to be. We are remembering the future, and in the process, creating it with a constant series of time loops. Maybe we are actually living right now in the near future, reaching back every second of every day to work our bodies like a biological puppet. I know that this is mind-bending. Of course it is. We're used to thinking in straight one-directional lines from the past to the present. We need to start thinking in circles from the future to the present and back to the future. So, yeah.
If we're reaching from the future, is there a present? Like, is there a present?
No, no, there really isn't. It's so fleeting that it's already gone as soon as you can try to comprehend the present. It's not there exactly. So you don't need to play with Hinton's blocks. You can do it. It's quite fun. I haven't, but you can do things like looking at your dreams a little bit closer, and to also understand that seemingly everybody's doing this. We are just, all of us, constantly beings of the future. And the interactions that we have, those strands that are worming through Minkowski block universe, sometimes they come together. Our interactions with each other, as much as we like to think that we're being constrained by the block universe, it's actually incredibly meaningful and profound, I'd say. People talk about the human stain. I think it is more of like a human gift that we share with each other. And Eric Wargo really, he would agree with this. I'm going to read from Time Loops just for a second here.
Yeah,
Obviously, though, time loops have implications beyond academia and science. They are relevant to our everyday lives and relationships. For one thing, it may no longer be just a mushy New Age platitude to suggest that human beings really do share an invisible connection with each other. As an anti-materialist has always maintained, there is also a very good reason why any trace of such physical connection vanishes when scientific spotlights are trained on spaces between us. Instead of traversing the present as some kind of invisible telepathic bridge across space or some non-local platonic collective unconscious, our occult interhuman connection traverses the fourth dimension, the not yet, as the real physical encounters and interactions with each other, with other people and ideas awaiting us on the road ahead. I like to think of the secret psychic structure of social life as a kind of 4D lattice. Our precognitive, pre-sentimental unconscious orients us to those confluences where our individual world lines snaking through Minkowski space-time meaningfully intertwined and intersect. Bernard Beitman describes it as connecting with coincidence. It's an apt phrase, and we no longer need invoke some acausal synchronistic field stage managing significant moments or archetypal meaning machines doing the connecting. We connect. We stage manage via our own amazing tesseract brains. That's a wee bit of a time loop. And yeah, you should read Time Loops, everybody. So I think for this, we have to pay a bit more time with time. You have to get time right, to you at least. Time is special, and give time the time it deserves. Seemingly everything is filled with glorious meaning, and it's not maddening. It is actually incredibly beautiful. And if you're frustrated with the idea of free will, I have one word for you. You're creating. Always. You are becoming what you always were. So that's something to start with. We have to understand, though, that this is a model. The model of time loops Minkowski block universe, these are they're models. We can't actually physically say that they exist. But there's nothing wrong with models. They are useful for us. And cycles are great as well, especially for people that listen to this podcast. Things like astrological cycles or cycles of history and cycles of time. As Kripal said, we need to start thinking more circularly, less linearly. And if you have two models, because I don't think that Eric Wargo's universe is the only universe or thing that exists. I do think that there's actually a lot of other things that we can't explain that I've certainly experienced. Two models, they don't need to be separate, so you can work with models as well. And the persistence of linear time is very dumb. I know it's the only thing that we think that we can experience, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's not. Linear time, that's all you got? It's a bit lazy for me. I say everybody dive into this idea of things being more constrained yet still beautiful and interesting. And I will quote everybody's favorite racist author of all time, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, with a little quote here from Beyond, where he says, "What do we know of the world and the universe about us? Our means of receiving impressions are absurdly few, and our notions of surrounding objects infinitely narrow. We see things only as we are constructed to see them, and can gain no idea of their absolute nature. With 5 feeble senses, we pretend to comprehend the boundlessly complex cosmos." So, a lot of people have said, and especially people that I talk to with this kind of thing, like, Doug, they're building quantum computers. We could be able to see this stuff happen in real time. And I'm always of the opinion, like, if you're with your mother when you were a kid and you see a new toy and you tell her you want to buy the new toy, and she says, "No, dear, you've got perfectly good toys at home." I'm the same with quantum computers. It's like, no, you've got a perfectly good quantum computer at home. You've got your brain. So I think that we really need to lean into the things that we already have. So what can we do? What can you and I do? I hope that some of us are already doing these things. One of the biggest things, and one of my favorite books of all time, it is a bit dated, is a book by J.W. Dunn called An Experiment with Time. And he really started to record his dreams and see how much of them were coming true. I say dream journal. Please, 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 if you can remember your dreams, write them down or record them on your phone. Every month, go back, or even every week, go back and see what has happened, and you will be quite amazed at how many things link up. And as much as at the beginning, this will happen, and I guarantee you it'll happen. You'll just say random chance or coincidence. The more you do it, the better you get at it, the more it happens, and it is really quite incredible. The largest vector into the uncanny for all of history has been dreams. Our ancestors were not stupid. They lived in highly complex societies with different worldviews. And what we need to understand is that a worldview is not a world. So the way that they perceived things, specifically through dreams, was important. Listen to them. Things like hypnagogia, which is the strange state that you are in before you fall asleep, that kind of weird, you know it when you feel it. And hypnopompia, which is what happens right after you wake up. These are incredibly important, and in some ways, I actually think that they are more important than dreaming. And I'm paying a bit more attention to hypnopompia as opposed to hypnagogia, because that strange state, once you're coming back from whatever is the dream world, is really quite incredible to get certain things. I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm definitely seeing strange instances of people dying specifically, which is very strange. And I'm not constantly thinking about celebrities that are old that might die. I'm like, it's just something that goes through.
All right, please do give me a heads up then.
Okay, certainly. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
I'm one of those people that would want to know. Okay.
For sure. The other thing that we can do, notice time loops. And more specifically, when a strange coincidence occurs or something like a synchronicity, what are you feeling? Like, besides the idea of that the universe is trying to send me a message, no. Like, bring it back to you. What are you feeling during these crazy anomalous events and coincidences? Because it very well could be that's where it came from. It came from you sensing yourself. What is that? Is it out there or is it in here? That's something you might have to sit with for a little while. Journeying, things like astral projection or soul flight, and active imagination, incredibly important. Again, I pick up some very interesting things when I do these things. Building the blocks, the crazy blocks that Hinton had, sure, if you feel like doing that, go for it. I have had no success, but if you are able to somehow pop out of the third dimension and go to the fourth, give it a shot. Also, look at cycle models. Not just things like the seasons. Notice the cycles around you, but maybe find a cycle model that you go off of. There's many of them. You look them up. They're all out there. If you're feeling iffy with the block universe, I reached out before this episode to Dr. Eric Wargo. He's a great guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. He's one of those guys where I said, like, I don't understand what you're talking about, Eric. He's like, oh, here's some slides from a recent presentation. It's like, oh, that actually makes perfect sense now. Thank you so much, Eric. And if you do listen to this, Eric, thank you so much. Yes, he was a very kind man, but I said, what happens? Because the idea of living in a universe where everything has already happened is terrifying. It just means that you can do whatever, right?
I don't know if I find that terrifying as much as liberating.
Exactly.
But
No, for sure. It really is. And he suggests things like Zen koans. Like the famous one is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? They really are a little bit ahead of us in this respect of being able to think about what is the next stage of Zen for you to be able to operate in your world knowing that things are going to be okay. He says meditate on this every day. Meditate on just the idea that things are going to be okay. And as Amber said, somewhat liberating, right? There's freedom there. There's not a lack of freedom. There is a real freedom that we have. Instead of thinking of constraint, think of creation. That's it. For me, as somebody who does rituals, every day for the last 2 years, I have done an invocation of Ion, which is one of the Greek gods of time, from the Greek magical papyri XIII. If you have a copy, look it up. There's some really good stuff there. But I give credence to time. Time is very important to me. So I have made time sacred, and it's not just special. I have personified it. I have a god of time that I talk to and I give reverence to every day, and I think this is also very important. However you give credence to time, please do it, because it is important. Here's another thing for people that specifically people that are more into the weirder stuff like I am, and paranormal strange stuff, is that we have to start thinking of paranormal or mystical or Gnostic or even religious experiences or thought. We have to start to think of them as having a dimension unto themselves. And there's a really great, he was a professor from the University of Chicago. His name is Ion Culiano. Very interesting character. Look him up. Look up his death specifically. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but if you find Ion Culiano, But he did some really interesting stuff. I'll start this off by basically saying context and comparison are things that I've talked about quite a bit when trying to understand these strange anomalous experiences, or even religion, or mysticism, or Gnosticism, or magic and the occult is great, but some of the more impossible aspects of them, they need a little bit more. And so I'm going to read here a little bit from Dr. Jeffrey Kripal's Authors of the Impossible. He says, "So too is systems of thought, which exist in their own logical dimension. They interact with history at every moment, and the chronological sequence they form is a sort of sequential puzzle, like the 4 prongs of the fork viewed from the perspective of the Flatlander. What Culiano proposes, then, is that we begin to study history as a similar interaction that we study systems of thought in their own dimension, and recognize the fork for what it is, an object coming from outside and crossing into our space in an apparently disconnected way, in which there is a hidden logic which we can only reveal if we are able to move out of our space. In other words, we cannot properly interpret religious systems and their appearance in time because we assume that the 3 or 4 dimensions we routinely experience exhaust the possible, when in fact we live in a universe of multiple dimensions to whose astonishing complexity and strangeness the history of religions, and particularly the history of Gnosticism and mysticism, gives abundant witness. Not surprisingly, Ion Culiano was ignored. The implication of what he was trying to say are simply too deep and disturbing to the neat rational lines of modernity and the normally linear modes of writing history. He shattered our little box. He wrote off the page, outside of our flatland." Yes, a lot of these things, they deserve a dimension of their own as well. So this is something I think that we really need to talk about and sit with for sure. Free will. Ugh. What can I say about free will? And specifically, if you do not like the idea that you probably don't have one. Dr. Eric Wargo, he actually sent me a chapter of a book that's going to be produced in the next year. Strangely, I was deeply honored. Yeah, so he sent me a chapter, and it was specifically about people that are interested in the occult and how to think of time loops and precognition and retrocausation. As a magician, we play with beliefs, and any beliefs or hang-ups about a lack of free will, they need to be put up on a shelf, and we must instead to start think of these beliefs' function and what they might be in a self-consistent universe. So we need to sit with that for a little while, which might be a tough pill to swallow. But keep with the rituals, and keep with the spells, and keep up with the magic. This is something that is not just habits, but we need to start making them a behavior. If you're new to magic, start. If you're active in magic, continue. He wrote this in that chapter that he sent me. He said that all behavior may really be premonitory in some sense. What we interpret in hindsight as our will or intention is thus really the reward of having had an accurate premonition of a future successful action. Definitely. If the materialists attack that what we do is all in our mind, so fucking what? I really don't think so, and I certainly haven't experienced that much that it's all in my mind. But even if it is, the mind is a terrifyingly weird, strange space dimension itself that holds great power and insight. On this, Eric Wargo said, "Mind, the persistent special sauce of life itself, is indeed a builder, and in the most radical way possible. Through our thoughts, we write/wrote our life stories." But that horticultural metaphor of sowing comes to mind. Our thoughts in the present plant seeds in the past, which germinate not only as dreams, but also as other kinds of intuitive actions, including actions that may generate boons or positive rewards still to come. Imagine how much more we could direct that self-shaping capacity by building habits of attending to our dreams and other inspired or creative thoughts, and honoring them, even without knowing what future experiences and events they refer to. Imagine discovering on a weekly or an even daily basis that you really have been retro-shaping your life all along, that you really are the author of your long self. So, the future? According to Eric Wargo, he says that there's a gold rush to discover that the brain is indeed a quantum computer in some sense. And as usual, it sticks to the brain, and this is what materialist rational science will do, but this is still a step in the right direction. Eric Wargo predicts that synaptic plasticity is affected to some degree by future experiences and not just prior ones. So that's one of his predictions. Where to go? Where to go from here? Well, I say, please read Flatland. Flatland is a wonderful book. It's very short. You can get through it quite quickly. I believe they've made movies and there's cartoons about it. Read the book. It's quite fun. Hinton. Yes, read What is the Fourth Dimension, and if you can, read his book, The Fourth Dimension. They're very good. And also read up a bit more on his life. He's an interesting character, and he's definitely worth looking into. J.W. Dunn, An Experiment with Time, an essential book. I've talked about this book at least 3 times on this show. Please have a look. It is really quite wonderful. Rudy Rucker, who wrote a book called The Fourth Dimension, Towards a Geometry of a Higher Reality. It goes through the fourth dimension. It goes through Flatland. It goes through what he thinks spirits might be, or if they exist, kind of thing. His books, his fiction books, deal with a lot of spatial and dimension stuff. They're wonderful and strikingly original books. Like, they're one of those books that I think time, whatever that is, will be very, very kind to. Don't go in there expecting great characterization. It's about how the story is told and how dimensions have strange effects on the characters within the stories. They're all great. Like, I've read, I think, about 7 of his books, his fiction. They're really, really fantastic. Context and comparison are indeed important for understanding dimensions and where they came from and how to understand them and why we're fascinated with them. There's a book by Christopher G. White called Other Worlds. I highly suggest it. It is a great book. But lastly, of course, Eric Wargo. Read Time Loops. It is the most interesting, mind-blowing book I have read in the last 5 years, and I can't stop talking about this book. I recommend it for everybody, anybody who's rationalist, anybody who's occult. It is a book that just goes across everything. It is a wonderful, wonderful book. In the space of less than a year, I've read it 3 times, and I can't get enough of it. There is so much crazy stuff within that book. He's also got a blog called The Nightshirt. please look it up, but realize that some of the ideas that he talks about from 2010 until about 2015, he has changed his mind. And when I talked to Eric about this, he says he evolved. Smiley face is what he wrote. But yes, very good. Definitely check out The Night Shirt. And his new book, oh dear, if the chapter that he sent me was a little taste of what his new book will be, should be released in the next year, about dreams and precognition, it looks to be an amazing work just building off of time loops. People say, like, you're not really mentioning any science books or any mathematic books, no Hawking or anything. Like, they're out there. There's so many of them. And the fourth dimension, Minkowski block universes, you can find them. Martin Gardner is a good example of somebody who wrote about it. There are so many, so please find them. Yes, they're all good. I don't understand the mathematics stuff, but it doesn't mean you can't get something from it. And with that, the last word has to certainly go to the person who I think gave us this fascination of the fourth dimension. That would be Charles Howard Hinton. This is what he says, and this is the final word. It is, of course, evident that these speculations present no point of direct contact with fact, but this is no reason why they should be abandoned. The course of knowledge is like the flow of some mighty river, which, passing through the rich lowlands, gathers into itself the contributions from every valley. Such a river may well be joined by a mountain stream, which, passing with difficulty along the barren highlands, flings itself into the greater river down some precipitous descent, exhibiting at the moment of its union with the spectacle of utmost beauty of which the river system is capable. And such a stream is no inapt symbol of a line of mathematical thought, which, passing through the difficult and abstract regions, sacrifices for the sake of its crystalline clearness the richness that comes to the more concrete studies. Such a course may end fruitlessly, for it may never join the main course of observation and experiment, but if it gains its way to the great stream of knowledge, it affords, at the moment of its union, the spectacle of the greatest intellectual beauty, and adds somewhat of force and mysterious capability to the onward current. So that's it. That's the episode on the fourth dimension, Amber. Did you learn something?
I did. Thank you. No, I really enjoyed that. You brought up a lot of things that I was already familiar with and expanded on some things that I wasn't. And just based on kind of the proclivities that you and I have, my brief understanding of this topic veers a little off from where you are. So it was neat to kind of bring those things together and to hear that more nuanced perspective.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful, Amber. Thank you so much. That's the end of the show, everybody. So head to whatmagicisthis.com. There you will find ways to subscribe to my podcast. I'm not going to list them. If they have podcasts, I'm there, guys. Also on my website, you can find my Twitter account, which I'm getting quite good at. And you can find my Instagram account. I don't know how it works. I'm trying. There's some interesting photos up on there. Yeah, please check out. And then there's Facebook, which is an afterthought for me. I'll put things up there, and yeah. But if you try to contact me on Facebook, I'll get to it in like maybe a couple of days. I don't check it constantly. Anyways, also on my website, you will find show notes. I have a ton of show notes for every topic that I do. I really go out of my way to put up some really interesting perspectives up there. The actual diagrams of how Hinton came up with the blocks and what colors the blocks are, that will be up on one of the articles I'll be putting up for this episode. Check them out. But yes, every episode I got tons of show notes. Head to whatmagicisthis.com to see those. If you like the show, please leave a review on either iTunes or elsewhere. Yeah, I like that. Clicking the little stars is cool, but writing a little something, I like that. It's very well appreciated. But more than anything, if you like the show, tell a friend. Tell a friend. They might enjoy the show, and everybody gains. Amber, that's it. And guess what? We got to end the show. And we got to end the show with the post-show quid pro quo. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. So, which of the crazy out there, unproven, but seem to be with us for all of time phenomena would you really like to be true? So let's say life after death, or aliens, or psychic powers, or ghosts, or...
Did you come up with this before I asked you the question at the beginning?
Yes.
Because it's actually very similar.
Correct.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Time loops, baby.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. So basically, what sort of like paranormal or otherworldly construct would I want to be
true?
True.
Yeah. Tomorrow, somebody puts out a paper saying, guess what, guys? We found life after death. Like, and everything changes
Oh,
for us, right?
oh gosh.
And not,
Okay, I actually like life after death. I know that you
yeah,
brought it up, but no, that would. As you know, I'm pretty currently secure in my belief that we just become worm food, and
yeah.
continue. The energy that we are continues, obviously, because it cannot be created nor destroyed. So we continue on and be other things, and be blades of grass and other.
Right.
But to actually have some sort of consciousness
Right.
that then occurs beyond, if there was some sort of proof, a really, really solid, testable proof, that undeniable, that would be stellar. I would,
Yeah, wouldn't it?
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think that there was that. But you know what? I also kind of want proof of alien life. Not that, I think that there probably is.
Yeah.
I think it's very narcissistic to think that we're the only, but in some way that we could actually connect with, or
Right.
that would be cool too. Oh my gosh, that's such a big question.
I know, isn't it? You kind of want all of them, right? Like, I want all of these to be true.
All of them. Yeah, I'm not a skeptic of this sort of thing because I don't want to believe.
It's just the evidence doesn't seem to be there.
I just want. So, yeah. If there was proof of these sort of things, I would. That would be amazing. Yeah.
All we have is experience.
Oh, my dear. Well, I've enjoyed this thoroughly. Thank you so much for including me.
Oh, no worries. And it was great to talk to you. I wanted to have you on the show for such a long period of time. And because of things happening in the world, this has made it a little bit easier. But Amber, I would hope that if I asked you to come back, you would come back on the show, because I've had a wonderful time. That's the show, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed. Yeah, this is a little bit shorter than the previous episodes, but guess what? It's still just as good. And so if you like this stuff, come on back. We're going to talk about more of this weird, everything in the world is not what you think it is, magic, occult stuff that I love so much, and I know that you do as well. So thanks for listening, everybody. Please come on back, and I'll talk at you a little bit later, but stay luminous. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.